It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances, my housemate and landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay, and, well, people have their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, and enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house, drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the third time he said this that I asked why he keeps saying that, and he responds, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work, because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about certain ladies of the night, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death, and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up, but when he got tweaking, he'd always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I started to think that it had gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because money was tight at the time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he's probably just engaging in some sort of outward fanaticism. I knew that he would acquire these services from certain women on occasion, but again, didn't judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. And then at one point when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York, I know that animals can be trapped in walls and die, but this was the garage and there were no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I'd do and decided that I would confront him about the smell. I decided to poise the question in somewhat of a suggestive way by expanding on his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I'll never forget his reaction. His eyes widened and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What? Really?" I said yes, really, and there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage while I was again doing laundry. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can sparsely remember that I had to be someplace, packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard, and I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple of months I had lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and certain workers and explicit talk of intimate violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video that he made, He is a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and this strange, leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of these things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to Ocheti Oyate camp during the anti-pipeline protests with Standing Rock Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose, as I wanted to get out of that house in the worst way. My last night there, I didn't give notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again, started in the same conversation, loosely describing murder and violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him that he would get caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense that he had been using before. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me, so I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center, so they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they took interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember and left it at that, feeling just a little bit better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times. I told my mother all about this, and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on Google Maps. She pulled up the street view, and I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but could not put together a practical reason for it, or why I'd be using it, unless he was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, this is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I will get closure or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested, and I read about it. I have grown up poor and been around the low life a lot. I've interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. I believe I was about 16 when this took place, so I'm guessing it was in the spring to summer of 2001. It was either a Friday or Saturday night when I got a text asking what I was up to and if I wanted to go hang out. I have no idea who the text was from, as the number wasn't saved in my phone and didn't have a name at the end of the text. I text back and got a call. Picking it up, I hear my friend Ung's voice. I was happy to hear from her, as we went to secondary school together. I went on to college and she decided to do other things, so we didn't see each other regularly anymore. She didn't have social media and refused to have a mobile phone. I praised her for finally getting with it and getting a phone. She burst my bubble when she said it was a friend's. We had a quick chat. It was probably about 10 p.m. and I can't be arsed to get ready, so I declined and said another time. Around 12 a.m. I got a text. I thought she was contacting me again. The text read something along the lines of, "Hey, this is Daniel, Ung's friend. I'm bored and stuck here until Ung wants to leave. Hope you don't mind me texting you." I didn't at this age. I used to be up till stupid o'clock on the internet, and as he was a friend of my friend, I didn't see a problem. So we'd text for a bit. It was kind of nothingness conversation. Around 2 a.m. or so I get a call. It's him. He said I sounded nice and that he wanted to have a chat. Okay, cool. I'm still wide awake, so we had a chat. It was all right. We had a laugh, talked about nothing much for a while, and then said goodbye. Next morning I get a text from him. I reply. He texts me all day and rings me again later. I found out more about him, that he works in the local shopping center in a certain store I went to all the time. The kind of stuff he likes, which is nothing like me, but whatever. We talk about where we live, as we live in different towns about 20 minutes apart by bus. At this point, he knows what I look like, as Ung has shown him photos of us she had, but he also had seen my Friendster page, which had current pics of me. He, like Ung, didn't have a social media back then, so I didn't know what he looked like, but he described himself. Could have been literally any boy in Southeast London at that time. I didn't really care what he looked like, as I wasn't interested like that, but I had no problem chatting. So this carries on for a week or two. Him texting me, calling me, find out about me, asking loads of questions, which at the time seemed harmless. Around this time, I had time off college for Easter holidays, and he starts saying we should meet up as we are both free. I tell him I can't, as I have to do some coursework. This was only half true. I did have coursework, but I always leave it till the last minute, so was literally just being lazy sitting around the house. He clearly didn't get the message, as he started to text me constantly. If I didn't reply fast enough for him, he sent more texts and would call. I was like, dude, I'm so busy trying to do this. When I have time, I will text you. After a few days of that, I got a text saying, I have to go do XYZ. I'm in your area, let's meet. I told him I was busy and couldn't. He said that was okay, but then kept bombarding me with texts urging me to meet him. No. 2 days later, I get a text saying he is in my area again and we have to meet. I say no. At the end of that week, he is there again and again. No. The start of the weeks, he starts again about being in my area. I ignore the text this time. Later on that day, I get a call from a local area number. I pick up, and it's him. He says he is here and wants to hang out, and that I didn't reply to his text. I tell him that I'm not home and I've been flat out, and that I will text him when I'm free. I found out the number he called from was a public telephone box on the main road that connects to the road I live on. The constant texts were annoying, but I let them slide as I had no intention on meeting him and it was only a text. But to find out that he was actually literally in my area and knew roundabout where I lived, all the questions he was asking before that seemed harmless made sense now. He was narrowing down where I lived to the street. As I have a college at the bottom of my road and a park at the top, he knew this. He knew what bus I got from college and to the stop I got off at, which further narrows down the part of the street I lived on. He used to ask things about the clothes I wore and accessories I had, what patches, etc. were in my backpack, so he would definitely know it was me if he saw me. No, this was not cool at all. I told him that I am not meeting him anytime soon, that I am busy and that he needs to chill out as I don't need the hassle. This really put me off wanting to speak to him, as it was so weird and I really should have told him to buzz off at this point, but when you really don't care about the person other than to have a chat with, I just thought if I lessen the contact, he will get bored and buzz off on his own accord. School started again and I felt safer knowing that he couldn't just be in my area. He had college quite far from me, so I wouldn't run into him. But the shop I usually went to, which was near my college, I avoided as there was nothing in there I couldn't get elsewhere, and didn't really go into the shopping center unless I had to, and that would be during school lunchtime, so thankfully he wouldn't be there. This wasn't because I was scared. I just didn't want to meet him, and I was starting to get angry the more I thought about it and didn't want to be nasty to him. So the texts continued over the next few weeks. I wouldn't reply to the majority of them, and when I did, they were polite and stated that I had exams soon. I didn't want the distraction. I then started to ignore his messages. They didn't stop. Another phone number I didn't know texted me. I was like, who is this? And of course it was him from his mom's phone, and he was angry that I'd replied to that text and not his. Now this was becoming a joke. During this time, one Saturday night, my mom rang me as I was coming home from a gig. She told me a boy I went to primary school called Morley rang to speak to me today and asked if he could call again, and before the call ended, asked if I had a boyfriend. I was like, what? Morley used to like me back in primary, but we hadn't spoken since we left school at like 11, but our moms still chatted occasionally, so I had no clue what this was all about. I get a call from Morley the next day. He tells me he is sorry for ringing me, but he really needs to ask me a question. So he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said I didn't. He then asked if I knew someone named Daniel. I said yes, that I had been speaking to someone called Daniel, but what started out as a pleasant chat and some texts had turned into way too much. He then went on to tell me that Daniel goes to his 6th form and is loosely associated with a friend group, as no one really likes him. Boys being boys, they were talking about girls, and Daniel went on to talk about his girlfriend. They asked questions about her, and he told them who she was, what she looked like, what she was into, where she lived. He didn't think much of it. When he came back to school after the holidays, he had a bunch of clothes in his bag. They asked him where he was going, and he was bragging about how he had come straight from hers as he stayed around her house lots during the holiday, and told them in detail how he would be intimate with her and got to all sorts. He used to entertain them with stories about her all day, and after a while finally showed them her picture. My picture. Morley was livid on the phone. He said the stuff Daniel was saying that we had done was just plain nasty, and the stuff he was saying about me he didn't think was true and wanted to confirm. He told me he would ring me back in a few days. Daniel was still trying to speak to me. After hearing from Morley what he had been up to, I'm not going to answer clearly. I set the number to divert. I don't know if you could block numbers on my phone back then. If it could, I didn't know how. I ignored the text he sent me. I didn't even open them. I got home from school Monday afternoon, and at about 6 o'clock I get a call from Morley, who again was angry but was delighted. He told me he just got home and that Daniel had come into school with clothes in his bag again that morning, and said that he had been staying at mine and that we were doing all sorts of things at that point. And Morley, in front of everyone, was like, "You have never been to her house." He was like, "Of course I have." And Morley was like, "Well, it must have been a Wendy house, as he knows for certain that he has never been to my house, as he knows me and had spoken to me yesterday, and that I am not his girlfriend. In fact, he has never met me, only spoken to me and how I refused to meet him, and have been pretty much ignoring him as he kept turning up where I lived to try and spot me." This didn't go down well, obviously, as he had been made to look like a complete idiot. That night, my phone wouldn't stop with texts and calls from his mom's number. He wouldn't stop calling. I told my mom everything after Jay called, as she wanted to know what it was about. I gave the phone to my mom at 11 p.m., and she picked up, and he was sounding all in a panic, saying he needed to talk to me. She said no, I was in bed, how inappropriate it was to call at this time, and not only that, but to not call again. Number put on divert, and I was still getting voicemails. I texted him and told him to leave me alone, that it really is enough now. I know what he did and that I don't want to know him. He went quiet till around 2 a.m. when he started calling again from a third number. I was asleep and my mom was awake. The call woke me up, so I called her in and she picked up the phone and went mental at him. She said she knows all about it and to leave me alone or there will be trouble. He still texted. After that, my mom was beyond livid, and at 6 a.m. she rings his mom's mobile, woke her up, told her all about what her son was up to. She was initially angry to be woken up so early, but when my mom laid it out, she just went quiet and was like, "I'm sorry, I will deal with it." I didn't hear from him again after that. Ung called me. I didn't speak to her since that first night, about probably just over a month, and a bit before, and said she found out what had happened. I think from his mom, as she wanted to know the validity of the call she received and was incredibly sorry. That he wasn't even really her friend. They knew each other from primary school and he lived close, and that he just turned up at her house and imposed himself on her, and her mom would always let him in despite her warning her not to, as she liked him, so she just put up with him. She did say that in the past, when he was in secondary school, he became obsessed with a girl in their area and used to effectively stalk her, and that her mom complained to his, but that he was young then and didn't think he did stuff like that anymore. Clearly, he never stopped. I was a college student at the time, and I needed some place to live since my parents were in a different city. I found this average house with a really good price, almost too good to be true. I contacted the owner and we planned the time I was free to come and check it out. The house was really big. Every room was huge. Even the bathroom was bigger than my parents' bedroom. I told the owner that I liked the house and I want to rent it for the next month. He agreed, but told me one thing. These were his words. About 3 months ago, I had one man live here. The first time he came, I had an uneasy feeling about him. I didn't want to sell it to him, didn't want to sell him the house, but he paid double, and I really needed the money, so I accepted. A few weeks pass, and I call him, but he doesn't answer. I come to the house to check on him, but he's nowhere to be seen. I come to the kitchen, where I see a pool of blood. I quickly ran into the house and called the cops. They checked it out, but couldn't find out his location. I was shocked by his words. He understood if I didn't want to rent the house, but I couldn't find anything better, so I did rent it at the end. Many months later, I was expecting a delivery. I ordered a new big TV because the old one the house had was really bad. After I unpacked everything, I didn't have the storage to put the boxes. The idea popped in my head that the house maybe had a basement. I looked everywhere, but in the end I called the owner and asked him. He told me that the only storage was the old shack in the backyard. I knew about that, but the shack was full. Later that day, I was in my bedroom, laying on my bed going through my gallery pictures when suddenly I see something on the ceiling. At first I thought it was a vent, but when I brought a chair and looked closer, I saw that it was an attic. I opened it and it was pitch black, so I used the light on my phone to see. I climbed in, and after a short time of searching, I saw a light switch. When I switched it, the light turned on. The light was very bad. It barely lit up half the attic. I was beginning to climb back down when a black trash bag caught my eye. I went to the bag with my phone and tried to pick it up. It was unusually heavy for a trash bag. I gave up on the idea of picking up and decided to open it. The moment I opened it, the smell of rotten flesh and every single thing you can possibly imagine being rotten hit me in the face. I shone my light to see the bag and see a woman, a dead woman starting to decompose. I jumped back so much that I fell through the vent opening on my back. I ran out of the house and called the cops. They began their investigation and asked me questions about the house. I called the owner, and in a matter of minutes he arrived. When the police questioned me, he told them the same story about the man he told me. Turns out that he didn't even know the house had an attic. Him and the police suspected it was the victim of the same man, but lack of evidence restricted them to go any further. The owner of the house apologized to me for everything, but I just couldn't bring myself to staying in a house that someone had died in. 1 week later, I moved out to another apartment with my roommates, and I was living there the rest of my college years. They never caught the man, and they were unable to identify the woman. This happened when I was in college. For months, 1 year, I was getting these calls. Every time the call came in, I was sleeping, and I had a rather erratic sleep schedule, many times staying up nearly all night. But each time they called, it managed to be when I was actually asleep. I would wake up getting this call every few weeks, of someone on the other end whispering as quietly as possible. I couldn't hear what they were saying. I could just barely hear a whispering sound. The first few times it happened, I was so tired when answering that I just chalked it up to a wrong number. After a few times, it finally woke me enough that I registered that someone was on the other end and that this had happened before. It sounded very creepy, and like they might be getting their jollies off to waking me up. Just got a super scary vibe. They wouldn't reply to me inquiring who they were or why they were calling, so I just hung up. I mentioned it to my significant other at the time, and he said that he'd answer the call the next time. Next time comes around, and I answered first, but when I realized it was the whisperer, I handed the phone to my significant other, who yelled at them and told them to quit calling. That didn't stop them. And the next time, I'm just so livid I threatened to call the cops, but I know. What could they actually do about a whisperer? I could tell this whisperer was enjoying this because he continued to call, only when I was sleeping, all at different times of the night. So I decided to ruin his good time when he called again. I decided to acknowledge his enjoyment and take his taboo behavior to the next level. Well, the phone starts ringing and wakes me up once again, and I'm prepared this time. He starts whispering and I respond, Ooh, I'm so glad you woke me up. I'm gonna take some of my warm poop and rub it all over myself. Oh, it's gonna feel so good. Do you like that? He hung up and never called back. And I'm sure if he was in one of my college classes, he was looking at me differently the next day when he saw me. And no, I'm not actually into that stuff.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.